We continue with a special edition of Countdown following today's postponement of a confrontation between police and Occupy Wall Street at Concede Park in New York, and the police violence that followed as demonstrators marched down Wall Street. The worst example of that we've seen was this. National Lawyers Guild legal observer Ari Douglas, in some fashion at minimum, hit by a police motor scooter, which was then left on his leg while he screamed in agony. Police spokesman Paul Brown, however, insists Douglas was not in fact run over by nor trapped under that scooter. Brown claiming, quote, independent witnesses said he purposely put his legs under the scooter and then claimed falsely he was trapped. A New York Daily News photographer, Joseph Marino, reportedly having said that while the scooter did indeed hit Mr. Douglas, quote, I saw him sticking his legs under the bike to make it appear he was run over. An Associated Press photographer has also reportedly claimed that Douglas put his feet under the scooter, which still doesn't explain the blood you saw on Mr. Douglas's face or on the street. Mr. Douglas has been hospitalized and arrested on charges including felony criminal mischief, obstructing judicial administration, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. Yet a police theory on this is he threw himself onto the ground and then purposely stuck his feet under a moving motorcycle, or moped is probably a closer description, a moving vehicle. He purposely put his feet, one or both of them, under this thing in order to what?
That is a good question. Well, let's start with what we do know.
Yeah.
Ari Douglas was a National Lawyers Guild New York City chapter legal observer. He was standing with a number of other professional photographers and journalists. It's important to note he was not part of the protest. He was there in an official capacity to legally observe. He was run into by a motor vehicle, as you described, which unfortunately is one of the tactics NYPD uses to affect crowd control, and was clearly struck by the vehicle. And then instead of being attended to or the police officer helping him, it seems, as I watched the various videos, the police officer backed onto Mr. Douglas, pinning him under the motor vehicle, and then, again, rather than helping him, dismounted that vehicle, walked away from it, and left him trapped under that vehicle. He was finally able to dislodge from the vehicle, at which point the police officers jumped on top of him and proceeded to injure him so seriously that he had to be rushed to an emergency room. That is not what police officers should be doing in that type of situation.
Apart from the idea that everybody's made so far in the show, that it's probably a really bad idea to be using not just mounted police on horseback are dangerous enough. You put a horse into the equation. You put some sort of combustion engine into it, you're going to get combustion. Apart from that, if your client is going to be an attorney and he actually did what they're suggesting, wouldn't that have ramifications for his career?
Well, so let's accept the premise that a trained National Lawyers Guild legal observer found it prudent to, I guess, throw himself under a moving motor vehicle and then, I don't know, pretend to have injured himself, although that's not what I see when I look at the video footage. I see someone clearly in distress, and if you look and listen to the audio, you hear people around him also distressed over seeing him in distress. But let's assume, for argument purposes, that that's the case. That does not justify bloodying him and injuring him so severely that he requires emergency services. The police are supposed to be here to protect us, and I think it draws an interesting parallel to what our clients are fighting for at Concede Park and Liberty Park for this kind of oversight and balance. And, you know, the NYPD is there to protect and serve the public in situations like getting run over by motor vehicles. That's when the police step in to protect you.
Or let's just step it one step back. Let's say he's there and he believes he's about to be run over by the vehicle. This is not a lightweight. He's not being hit by a bicycle here going 0 miles an hour. Even if he's just panicking and just bawling like a child there, some attention needs to be paid to him at some point. All right. Well, we probably exhausted the absurdity of this. Finally, tonight, I've been in many places asked for a special comment on Occupy Wall Street. I may do one again. I did one already, only I didn't know it at the time, much to my joy. Others had already thought what I had thought, but they had planned what I had only advocated. Thus, our number one story, my special comment on Occupy on October 14th would be virtually the same as the one I made in the wake of the ludicrous debt deal on August 1st. So rather than rephrase myself, let me repeat myself with a few edits for time. Our government has now given up the concept of right and wrong. We have in this deal declared that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all political incumbents are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are renomination, re-election, and the pursuit of hypocrisy. We have in this deal gone from the 4 freedoms to the 4 great hypocrisies. We have superseded Congress to facilitate $750 billion in domestic cuts, including Medicare, in order to end an artificially induced political hostage crisis over debt originating from the bills run up by a Republican president who funneled billions of taxpayer dollars to the military-industrial complex by unfunded, unnecessary, and unproductive wars, enabled in doing so by the very same Republican leaders who now cry for balanced budgets, and we have called it compromise. And those who defend it have called it a credit to a pragmatic president who wins some sort of political points, because having stood for almost nothing here, he gave away almost nothing for which he stood. It would be comical if it were not tragic. Either way, it is a signal moment in our history in which both parties have agreed and codified that the political structure of this nation shall now be based entirely. I'm going to talk with several eyewitnesses to today's violent events in Lower Manhattan. Ryan Hoffman, co-author of the Occupy Wall Street Declaration, previous guest on this program. Good evening, Ryan.
Good evening, Keith.
And Michael Tracy, a journalist and a contributing writer to The Nation, who was both an eyewitness and a police victim during today's march. Welcome to you. Michael, did you see the violence start? Did you see this with the protesters? Was there confrontation? Did they taunt the police? What was the origin point? Is there any way to be clear on that?
Well, evidently, Keith, the NYPD has determined that its most effective crowd control tactic is to simply send a fleet of motor cops, I call them, or police officers on motorcycles, into crowds of demonstrators who have assembled on streets there in Lower Manhattan near Wall Street. And when you inject law enforcement into a situation in that manner, it's not surprising that you're going to come out with confrontations, tensions escalated, and ultimately violence.
Yeah, when it looks like an episode of Rollerball, it usually it winds up looking like an episode of Rollerball. What happened to you? Were you threatened with arrest, or what was the? Walk me through what happened to you personally.
Sure. Well, I was in the plaza when the announcement was made that, contrary to previous insinuations, the park would not be evicted by the authorities. Mm-hmm. So there was a very palatable sense of elation there, excitement percolating throughout the crowd, so it wasn't surprising to me when a breakaway march went south down Broadway. So I trailed along to document what happened, and the next thing I know, the entire thing descended into pandemonium. Mm-hmm. Again, you had those cops on motorcycles zooming down the street. I witnessed a photographer who was kneeling on the ground taking a photo directly in front of me just get pummeled by a police officer. I witnessed a police officer, actually a white-shirted officer, so a higher-ranking officer, right, a lieutenant, deputy inspector, etc., just outright clock a guy in the face, yeah, seemingly without provocation. Yeah, and I have to tell you,
we had the tape of that. That's your tape, right?
That is my tape.
The green video, as it were.
Yeah, there's a video right now on Reason.com, Reason Magazine. I contributed a video report. And I have to tell you, Keith, it was disturbing to witness, because especially in a place like New York City, where we have such a rich history of political dissent, not only being tolerated, but embraced in public fora, to have law enforcement clamp down like the way that they have, it's troubling, and I think forebodes poorly for the nation.
Ryan, do you have any idea, all told, how many people were at Wall Street or were theoretically in violation of whatever the cops wanted them to do? How big a crowd it was by that point?
When we met up with the larger march, it was about 500 people.
Okay, so there could have, the claim that it could have been blocking traffic and all this, was there any validity to that?
There's some validity to it. That doesn't mean we deserve to get run over with mopeds. And I saw a police officer, while he was riding a moped, reach over his shield and give a protester a right cross. It was like something out of a Jason Statham movie. It was really intense. And to the NYPD's credit, they actually pulled that officer off of his moped. And I don't know if he's awaiting disciplinary action or not, but I know that he was pulled off.
Give me your assessment on that. And we always talk about this, the ratio of aggressive officers, aggressive policemen, to use the generic term for officers, and the blue shirt guys. The ratio of the aggressive ones to the not physically aggressive ones, was it the usual mix, or was it more or less?
I'd say it's always hard to tell, because you have a few certain individuals who decide to go above and beyond their call to inflict violence on protesters. And then you have individual police officers that I've had conversations with that are just there to do their job and don't want any confrontation. And those are the people that want to let us have our voices heard. And so it's hard to demonize the entire police force, but then you also have to take a look at their training. Over the past 10 years...
every situation is a fatal threat.
They've become so militarized that they don't know how to deal with peaceful protesters anymore, and I think that's a shame.
Michael.